Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us to better understand the updates made for the Model Lighting Ordinance. My name is Rachel Ty, and I'm the Lighting Project Manager for Sea Turtle Conservancy. Just some general housekeeping before we get started. If this is your first Zoom webinar, we are able to see that you're signed in, but we're unable to see your video or hear you. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please write them out in the chat, and I'll be collecting your questions throughout the presentation for a question and answer session at the end of the presentation with Stacy Gallagher and Tonya Long, who I'd like to introduce at this time. So we are joined by Tonya Long. Tonya Long is a fish and wildlife biologist for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC. Tonya received both her undergraduate and master's degree from the University of Central Florida. For the last 15 years, she has worked in sea turtle research and management all around Florida. Tonya has been with FWC since 2012 and has spent most of her career with the agency focusing on evaluating and minimizing the impacts of artificial lighting on sea turtles. So Tonya will be available to help answer your questions after the presentation. Stacy Gallagher will be giving the presentation today and will also help answer your questions at the end of the presentation. Stacy Gallagher has been a lighting project specialist and the development coordinator at the Sea Turtle Conservancy for nearly 5 years. Stacy is also engaged in advocacy on behalf of the organization aimed at protecting Florida sea turtles and their habitat. Stacy received her bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of South Florida and her master's degree in mass communication from the University of Florida, where she learned about the power of communication to inspire positive change in the world. She is passionate about making scientific information digestible to foundations, professionals, and the public to inspire conservation action. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand the controls over to Stacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you all for attending our presentation today about the updated sea turtle protection guidelines that passed late last year. The majority of our attendees are coastal commissioners and code enforcement personnel. I think we had 86 registrants. So I just want to say thank you for spending your time this morning with us and for your dedication in wanting to learn about how you can best protect your local sea turtle populations. So as Rachel mentioned, my name is Stacy Gallagher, and I'm a Sea Turtle Lighting Project Specialist and Development Coordinator at the Sea Turtle Conservancy. And Sea Turtle Conservancy is a nonprofit organization. We're based in Gainesville, Florida, and we're actually the oldest sea turtle conservation group in the world. We were founded in 1959. And on top of our research, education, and conservation efforts, for the last 10 years, we have been retrofitting problematic lighting on Florida's beaches throughout various grants. And during this time, we've also hosted educational workshops for code enforcement personnel across the state. And during these workshops, we often receive feedback that their local ordinances are outdated or are confusing to interpret. And many local governments have already started to adjust their language in their local ordinances to reflect new technology. But this can often be a large undertaking without a clear, up-to-date guide on how to update this language. So this is why we're so excited that the new Model Lighting Ordinance was certified in 2020 after years of work and input from DEP, FWC, the UF Law School, advocates, and STC. We're just so excited that this new model is finally approved and available. So that's what we'll be focusing on today. And the structure of this presentation will go like this. The first portion will be how artificial light impacts sea turtles. What is the Model Lighting Ordinance? What changed in the new language? And finally, the benefits of updating your local ordinance. And as Rachel mentioned, we will hold all questions until the end. But if you think of anything, just type it in the chat. And myself and Tonya Long will be there to answer your questions. So the first portion, I think it is worthwhile to learn about Florida's sea turtle species and how truly important Florida is for sea turtle nesting globally. So globally, there are 7 recognized species of sea turtles, but in Florida, our 3 top nesters are the loggerhead, the green, and the leatherback sea turtle. And in 2020, we had an overwhelming number of sea turtle nests, as we do almost every summer. In 2020, we had over 100,000 loggerhead nests. We had over 26,000 green turtle nests and over 1,600 leatherback nests. So a lot of people don't realize how truly important Florida is for sea turtle nesting in the US. Over 90% of all sea turtle nesting in the US happens here in Florida. And I mentioned that our sea turtle populations are globally important. And that's basically what this map is showing here. You can see those two big orange circles. Florida currently hosts the largest loggerhead nesting population in the world. So basically what happens to our sea turtles affects global populations. And you can see that there's another kind of large circle over in the Middle East in Oman, but that population is actually starting to decline, which is making Florida's loggerheads incredibly important for global populations of loggerheads. And unfortunately, sea turtles, they do face natural predators, but for the most part, the threats that they face are anthropogenic in nature. You can see from this diagram, they face threats from climate change, marine debris, pollution and oil spills, bycatch, dogs, and all of these are incredibly detrimental to their recovery. And the threat that we're focusing on today is light pollution and how we can manage it through effective lawmaking and enforcement. So as we all know, artificial light can come from a lot of different sources on our beaches. It can come from condominiums, even single family homes can produce a lot of light, street lights, dune crossover lights, or even special events. And all of this artificial light comes at a cost for sea turtles, who are dinosaurs. They've actually existed on Earth for more than 100 million years. And for most of this time, they were able to use the relative darkness of the dune and the relative brightness of the ocean to select a nest site and to make their way to the ocean. But these cues that they've been using for millions of years are disrupted by artificial light. And the impact of artificial light on sea turtles can be devastating. For adult sea turtles, fewer turtles emerge on lighted beaches, and those that do are more likely to turn around and go elsewhere, which is referred to as a false crawl. And that's basically what you can see here in this photo. The turtle crawled up on the beach, it was lit, or something was wrong with the beach that she didn't want to nest there. So she basically turned around and went back into the water. And it's important to note that sea turtles don't spend a lot of time on land. For the most part, they spend their lives in the ocean. So they're exerting tons of energy crawling up on the beach to try to pick a nest site. So that's important to know. And if she continues to crawl up on the beach and continues to face, lit beaches, she may eventually, in an extreme case, if she doesn't find a suitable nest site, she could just drop her eggs in the water. And that would obviously make them not to be viable. And that's not how we want to recover this species. Adult sea turtles can also become disoriented, where they crawl toward a light or, crawl in circles on the beach instead of crawling toward the ocean. And this can lead them to end up in roads, backyards, or even pools, as this turtle did. And I believe this turtle was able to be turned around and, sent back to the water. So that was good. But some turtles have not been so lucky. And unfortunately, adult sea turtles have been hit by cars before. And this is especially devastating because the loss of just one adult sea turtle can impact, they have the ability to produce tens of thousands of hatchlings in their lifetime. So to illustrate how sources of light influence sea turtle nesting, a field experiment was set up by Blair Witherington in the 90s, in which loggerhead nesting activity on beaches under dark conditions, which you can see on the top, were compared to nesting activity on beaches illuminated with mercury vapor lights, which is what you can see on the bottom. And he found that in front of the mercury vapor lights, nesting activity significantly decreased and fewer events resulted in nests. So you can really compare how nesting and false crawl activity drops off when there are lights involved with adult sea turtles. Hatchlings can suffer the same fate when it comes to trying to reach the water. There are two different ways that hatchling orientation can be altered. The first is through misorientation, where the hatchlings are affected by artificial light and they head all in the same direction, but it's the wrong direction, usually toward one source of light or one property that is contributing to artificial light. As you can see by these tracks, the water's in the background and all of the hatchlings crawled toward one property, which is not where they need to go. They can also become disoriented, in which they travel in zigzag paths in search of the ocean. And you can see here, that's what occurred. There's not really one way that they're all going. They're just kind of crawling in all different directions. And again, while they're doing this, they're not making it to the water. And for those that wander too long on the beach, they can be killed by predators. Ghost crabs and birds like this yellow-crowned night heron can predate them on the beach, and birds and larger fish can predate them in the water. If they're still unable to find the ocean, they can eventually die from exhaustion. And during this time, they're using up valuable energy stores that they need to make it out to the ocean. And it's really important because they need to make it out to sargassum seaweed mats offshore that they use for food and protection. So instead of making their mad dash to these seaweed mats, they're spending that valuable energy on the beach or in someone's backyard. And this figure here just further demonstrates how sea turtles are attracted to different wavelengths of light, which we'll learn a lot about in this presentation. Each line represents a different species and the proportion of hatchlings that were attracted to a specific wavelength of light that you can see on the bottom there. And as you can see, all 4 species had a 100% attraction rate when they're exposed to short wavelength light. And this is why sea turtle conservationists use long wavelength light to retrofit beachfront properties. As you start getting into the oranges and ambers and reds in that longer wavelength, the attraction rate starts to go down. And just further showing you kind of the comparison of short wavelength and long wavelength light, the pictures on the bottom are from a spectroscope, which is an instrument that you can point to different light sources, and it will show you the wavelength. So the spectroscopic images from these common bulbs reveal that they have the full spectrum, meaning that includes the violet through the red. So here you can see incandescent, mercury vapor, the full spectrum is visible. In comparison with long wavelength amber LED bulbs, there's a very narrow band of just the ambers, the yellows, and the reds. And these are minimally disruptive to sea turtles. And this LED technology was not available until the 2010s, which is why it's such a crucial addition to the new Model Lighting Ordinance. And in addition to keeping beachfront lights long wavelength, there are 2 other rules to sea turtle friendly lighting, which is keeping it low and keeping it shielded. So to demonstrate that, this is an amber LED shielded bollard fixture that is used to light up a pathway. And basically the state of Florida, in partnership with technical advisors, has determined that using all 3 of these strategies is the best way to reduce the impact of artificial light on sea turtles. And again, this bollard fixture demonstrates all 3 of those. It's mounted low to the ground, so it's only lighting up what you want to light up. It's shielded, so that light source is not visible from the beach. And it uses long wavelength amber LEDs, which we know is minimally disruptive to sea turtles. And the Model Lighting Ordinance encompasses all 3 of these rules in its language. And these are the 3 rules. So now that we know about sea turtle nesting in Florida, we know about the problem. Now let's talk about how we have attempted to try to protect this important, these important species through laws, which will get to the Model Lighting Ordinance. So in the US, sea turtles are protected at the federal, state, and local level. At the federal level, they are protected under the US Endangered Species Act as either threatened or endangered, depending on the species. And this act is responsible for protecting and recovering species within the US that are in danger of becoming extinct. And sea turtle protection in the US is managed by two federal agencies: on land by the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and in the water by the National Marine Fisheries Service under NOAA. And the US Fish and Wildlife Service has a cooperative agreement with the state of Florida that gives the state authority to manage permitted sea turtle activities and set rules for their protection. So at the state level, sea turtles are protected under a myriad of great protection laws, such as the Florida Marine Turtle Protection Act and the Beach and Shore Preservation Act. And in Florida, the two agencies that manage sea turtle protection are the Department of Environmental Protection and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And one of the conditions that the state had to manage sea turtle protection was to develop model lighting ordinance guidelines, which are present in Chapter 62B55 of the Florida Administrative Code. Plainly put, the model lighting ordinance is a guide upon which local governments can base their own lighting ordinances. The model itself is not a law. It is meant to be interpreted by local governments and is often altered slightly to adjust to local nesting biology, economic concerns, and political will. So that's really important because it's often kind of confused that the model must be followed in its entirety, while it should be because it is the best available technology and is a great guide. Local governments do have the ability to adjust their own ordinances based off of this guide. And the local government here has the biggest font because they have the most power when it comes to adopting and enforcing local lighting ordinances. Enforcement is completely carried out by the local government. So now that we know what the model lighting ordinance is, and before we kind of compare the 1993 ordinance to the 2020 ordinance, I wanted to kind of step back and get some context about the 1993 ordinance and how it came to be, because it truly did not just come out of thin air. It came from a problem that needed to be solved. And I think this story is really important to know where it started and where we are now. So to do this, I reached out to a person who was there when it happened, Dr. Blair Witherington. He's a renowned researcher, author, and conservationist whose scientific studies have given us a lot of what we know about the impacts of light on sea turtles. And currently, he's the vice president and director of In-Water Research Group. So when it came to the original 1993 model lighting ordinance, it all started in Brevard County in the 1980s. And all of these photos are from the Archie Carr Refuge in Brevard County during that time. So in 1982, a reporter for Brevard Today named Mike Thomas interviewed Lou Earhart, who was a UCF professor, just about the sea turtle nesting in the county and potential problems that were occurring with it, and published an article about it in the newspaper. And in the newspaper, you can kind of see in the screenshot on the left, the newspaper article actually called out properties that were causing sea turtle disorientation. It included photos and it named these properties and really brought to attention how problematic these lights were for hatchlings and adults in Brevard County. The next day, the editorial board of the newspaper published this editorial that said, "Lights on South Beaches imperil sea turtles," basically imploring the county commission to adopt some kind of protection ordinance to stop this from happening. And 2 days later, the county commission adopted its first emergency resolution, which resulted in notices going out to Brevard County beachfront residents. So this is really kind of the first time that this issue is receiving attention in this area in the 1980s. 2 years ahead, in 1984 to 1985, this is when momentum really starts to build for a real concrete solution to this problem. So in 1984, a UCF researcher named Paul Raymond was conducting nightly sea turtle surveys in Brevard County. And during this time, the organization known as the Ocean Conservancy tasked him with putting together a summary of problems that lights were causing for sea turtles in this area. And in this report, he found that hundreds of hatchlings were disorienting and that there was a dramatic reduction in nesting attempts by adult loggerheads at a brightly lit beach site. And this report, along with the previous newspaper articles, caught the attention of Teresa Kramer, who worked for Brevard County. And she used this kind of motivation to draft and champion Brevard County's first sea turtle lighting protection ordinance. And this was passed by the commission in 1985. So this is the very first local sea turtle protection ordinance that passed in Florida, and this happened in Brevard County. Skipping ahead a few years to 1986 to 1993, the momentum builds even more. During his thesis research, Blair Witherington found that the Brevard County ordinance had the potential to dramatically decrease sea turtle disorientation events. So he found that this ordinance has the potential to be effective. In 1986, Mary Dell Donnelly, who worked with the Ocean Conservancy, promoted the Brevard County ordinance and traveled the state speaking at commission meetings, encouraging coastal governments to adopt similar ordinances to protect sea turtles. And in 1992, Blair Witherington was hired by FWC's research division and was tasked with putting together a manual regarding the impact of lights on sea turtles. And this manual, once it was complete, along with the Brevard County ordinance, was used by DEP staff to craft the very first model lighting ordinance that was a statewide guideline. And it was officially certified in 1993. So all of this buildup started with a problem, and that problem was hatchlings and adults were disorienting in Brevard County. And it ended with a solution, a local lighting ordinance and a statewide model lighting ordinance. So I just wanted to tell you about that background to show that these guidelines did not come out of thin air. They came from a problem that needed to be solved, and it was backed up by science. Today, you can see that it's much more than just Brevard County that has a local lighting ordinance. Nearly every coastal county and or municipality in Florida has adopted some kind of local lighting ordinance, largely based off of this 1993 model. In recent years, groups have begun the process of drafting the new model, and local governments have updated their ordinance based off of this draft. Some have made gradual changes throughout the years to update the language, and some have not changed at all. Some still have the exact language that was present in the 1993 model. So 27 years later, a new model ordinance was approved at the end of 2020 by DEP. And a lot has happened since then, including the widespread use of LED technology, like I mentioned, which gave us that ability to target that narrow band, long wavelength light. And FWC also created its certified wildlife lighting program, where they test and certify products as turtle friendly and publish those results online. And this 2020 model is much different in structure than the 1993 model. In this new model, the impact of particular applications of light is targeted, such as street lights, sign lighting, pool lighting, and given their own particular requirements for turtle-friendly usage. So this new 2020 model is much more comprehensive than the 1993 model. So now we will get to the point where we actually compare particular sections in the 1993 model and the 2020 model. And it's important to note that I am really summarizing the major changes. I'm not going to go line by line in the new model, but I really just want to give you an idea of the content that's changed in the new model so you can decide if you would like to adopt that, which we hope that you do. So some new definitions in the 2020 model have been added. I just mentioned FWC's Certified Wildlife Lighting Program. They've added a definition in the new model that refers to this guidance, and it actually includes the website, which is really helpful. The term cumulatively visible was defined as light from numerous sources that as a group can be seen by an observer standing anywhere on the beach. This definition is often confusing for people, so I think it was made a little bit more clear in this 2020 model. Another change is the change from directly and indirectly illuminated to directly and indirectly visible. And this basically just refers to whether or not a glowing lamp can be seen from the beach. So I think just the term visible is a lot more easy to understand than illuminated. So that's why they changed that. They've also separately defined full cutoff versus fully shielded. So full cutoff fixtures basically mean that no light is emitted above a 90-degree angle, but it is technically shielded, but you can kind of still see the diodes or potentially that light source, whereas fully shielded actually directs the light downward and you have no way of seeing diodes or any kind of glow at all. So they've included separate definitions for those. And they've also defined long wavelength, which we've talked about earlier, and they've defined it as a lamp or light source emitting light wavelengths of 560 nanometers or greater, and absent wavelengths below 560 nanometers. So the long wavelength definition and the mention of long wavelength light is one of the major changes in the new 2020 model. The last two, they've also defined non-egress lighting. So this describes light that's not specifically needed for safety, but is sometimes just purely decorative, like strobe lights, string lights, or up lights. They've also defined temporary lighting as a non-permanent light source that may be handheld, such as flashlights, including cell phone flashlights, candles, flash photography, etc. And we at Sea Turtle Conservancy think this definition is really important because the instances of temporary lighting and flashlights being used on Florida's beaches are becoming a growing problem, and we definitely see it as a threat to sea turtle recovery. So we think it's great that this definition was added. So now I'll start to compare some of the major sections in both models. So as I mentioned, the change of lamps is one of the biggest changes from the 1993 to the 2020 model. In 1993, low wattage bug bulbs were considered the best available technology. Basically, the logic was that if bugs are not attracted to these bulbs, then sea turtles will not be either. However, now we know that bug bulbs are basically just a short wavelength bulb that have been coated with a yellow coating, and the wavelength is not actually changed. So in the 2020 model, that has been reflected and it's been changed, saying that all lighting affixed to the exterior of new permanent structures, construction or addition shall be long wavelength. So that's the change. And I wanted to note that the new model still separates existing construction from new construction, but the existing construction section basically affirms everything that was in the new construction section. So that's why I focused on the new construction items here, because it really helps define everything by application. I've already mentioned that they've included FWC's certified lighting guidance in the new model. And this is really just providing assistance and providing help for people who might not know where to find sea turtle friendly lighting or what it looks like. The model actually includes the website in here, and it's just there to help local governments, enforcement personnel, and beachfront property owners who might not know what sea turtle friendly lighting looks like. And this website is also updated very frequently, so it ensures that what's recommended in the ordinance is up to date. So that's really exciting. When it comes to roadways and parking areas, the recommendations are much different from 1993 to 2020. In 1993, low pressure sodium vapor lamps and fixtures were considered the best available sea turtle friendly technology. And you'll probably still see low and high pressure sodium fixtures in your community, but they're very quickly being phased out and replaced with LEDs because of their energy efficiency. So in the 2020 model, they recommend that all lighting of parking areas and roadways be long wavelength, downward directed, full cutoff, fully shielded, and mounted to the minimum level required to remain in compliance with safety standards. They also specifically mentioned the need to reduce the impact of pole lighting in parking lots and roadways. So this is kind of interesting that they're recommending, especially in parking areas, to potentially use, lower height pole lights or maybe even bollards in some areas for parking areas. Another kind of important guidance that was added is the addition of the guidance regarding roadway lighting when it comes to FDOT's design manual. So in January 2020, this is super exciting, the FDOT added 2 turtle-friendly pole fixtures to their approved products list, and they also added specifications that deal with wildlife-friendly lighting. So basically, the FDOT now has the capacity for roadway designers to include wildlife-friendly roadway lights in their plans. And this is so exciting and it's so important because coastal governments tend to defer sometimes to what FDOT recommends when it comes to roadway lighting. So this sets a precedent that turtle-friendly lighting can be used on coastal roadways. So they've included that guidance in the model. The window tinting section from 1993 to 2020. So in 1993, they defined tinted glass as any glass treated with tinting that has a transmittance value of 45% or less. So that basically means that 45% of the light from the inside is making it outside. And tinting is often marketed as turtle glass, which unfortunately is a misnomer. STC, turtle groups, researchers, and FWC have found that 45% transmittance still allows a lot of light from the interior of the property onto the beach, which could disorient sea turtles. So while the new model in 2020 still recommends the 45%, it also includes guidance encouraging or recommending local governments to go further and reduce the transmittance value. So actually the recommended transmittance value is 15% transmittance, which still allows for residents to see out of their windows. It helps reduce utility bills, it saves your furniture, but it also protects sea turtles effectively. The pool lighting section in 2020 was a newly added section. In 1993, the ordinance never specifically called out pool lighting, but it's really important that the new model did, because for those who have been on the beach, we know that pools tend to be one of the biggest offenders when it comes to artificial lighting. Pools are usually directly on the beach and people tend to overlight their pool because they're concerned for safety, for good reason. So this pool area section provides a lot of guidance on that. The lighting of pool decks, swimming pools, and spas should be long wavelength and fully shielded. And it also mentions the underwater lighting of pools and that it should be mounted horizontally in the wall and be long wavelength. I mentioned temporary lighting earlier, that definition. So in 1993, the mention of temporary lighting only dealt with construction sites during marine turtle nesting season. And in 2020, temporary lighting is referred to as handheld or other portable temporary lighting. And the mention is about the behavior of temporary lighting. So it says that this temporary lighting shall not be directed toward or used in a manner that disturbs sea turtles or other coastal wildlife. So it's important to note that the 2020 model does not ban temporary lighting, but it provides guidance on the behavior of the public when it comes to temporary lighting. Although I do believe some local ordinances have banned temporary lighting before. So if that's something that you want to look into, that's something that you could absolutely do. So those are just a few of the major updates from the 1993 model to the 2020 model. And now, hopefully you've been convinced to want to update your local ordinance, but if not, I'll give you some benefits of why you should. So the first is, as you've probably seen, the new model is much more specific than the 1993 model. One of the most common causes of confusion we hear from properties is that rules are inconsistent. Some groups tell them that bug bulbs are okay, some say they're not. This can make it incredibly frustrating and sometimes expensive for coastal properties to try to get into compliance. This new model covers many different types of lights and is specific about what is required in several different locations on a property. So it really leaves little room for confusion on what's allowed and what isn't. Secondly, the new model reflects the advances in technology and research that we discussed earlier. It recommends the best available sea turtle friendly technology and refers to guidance from FWC that is constantly being updated. So this will help to make sure that this model will still be relevant well into the future. The third benefit is that the new model will serve as a more effective tool for enforcement personnel to hold violators accountable. So code enforcement personnel can only enforce what's on the books. In areas that haven't updated their local ordinance since the 1993 model came out, and a property has met, those requirements, such as bug bulbs, the, code enforcement can't do anything to make them change their lights. And many code enforcement officers are already aware of the 3 rules of turtle-friendly lighting and what is the right lights and what are not. But if a local government adopts the guidelines from the new model, its enforcement officers will have the ability to better protect sea turtles and to hold property owners accountable. And finally, the new model is designed to last. The DEP, FWC, and partners have created this model to serve as the most up-to-date guide for adopting best practices to protect sea turtles. And by updating your local ordinance using these guidelines, you'll be utilizing the best known practices that are grounded in science that will be accurate for years to come. So a lot of people ask us, what is an acceptable grace period? Say that I do want to update my local ordinance. I can't just do it overnight. I have to give my community time to make the changes. And ultimately, it is up to you to decide what you think a good grace period will be. But 6 months to a year provides enough time for your community members to change their lights, but not so much time that it lowers the urgency to change. And finally, outreach is key. If you do change your ordinance, it's important to inform and educate the community, usually well before you make the change, so that there are no surprises. And this could be done through emails, mailings, social media posts. We've all been having these online public meetings, so maybe you can have a meeting just dedicated to this that your community can go to and ask questions. But you also want to make sure that you provide recommendations for problematic lights before the new ordinance goes into effect. So that way your community members are prepared. So that's all I have. I just want to say thank you so much for joining this. We will now get into questions, but I wanted to put up our contact information here in case you have further questions once this presentation's over. And thank you to FWC and all of our partners for making this update possible. All right.
Thank you, Stacy. To start everyone off, we're going to actually start asking Tonya a question. So once Tonya comes on. And if you have any questions, please continue to put them in the chat. I will continue to collect them. So Tonya, can you answer why there was such a delay between the 1993 and the 2020 Model Lighting Ordinance?
Sure, and that's a great question because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, why was it almost 30 years before we were able to update that? And there's a couple of reasons. One is that, as Stacy mentioned, one of the major changes in this update has to do with technology, with LED technology. And even though at this point it seems like LED has been around for forever, in reality, LEDs weren't widely available to the public and easy to acquire really at all until about maybe 10 to 15 years ago. But LEDs specific for this purpose, where they're producing just long wavelength light, those really only became widely available, easy to purchase, easy to find, probably in the last 5 to 7 years, maybe. The other thing is that this is, again, as Stacy mentioned, this rule ultimately falls under DEP's rulemaking authority. So we partner together with DEP to make these updates. And so that requires a lot of coordination back and forth between the agencies. It has to go through lots of drafts. And so this process to get this ordinance updated actually started almost 3 years ago. So it takes a long time to get through that process. Number one, to get the go-ahead from the powers that be to go through this process, and then to actually get through the revisions and the public meetings and all of the things that are involved with updating a rule. So, once the technology got to where we felt like, okay, we can make an update that's going to be really meaningful, and we can write this in a way that it's going to stand the test of time and not have to be updated every time the technology changes. Once we reached that point, it took a while to actually get through the whole process. So that's mainly why it's taken us so long to get here, but we're glad that we're here now.
Thank you. Either one of you are welcome to answer this question. Do you have a sample of the model lighting ordinance that you can share?
Yes. Yeah, I can definitely email that to whoever it is. But yeah, it's widely available. So yeah, I can share that.
Next question for you, Stacy. I would love to be able to present this to our Beach Town Council. Will there be a way that we could get the presentation, parts of it, or printed?
So this is being recorded right now, and we'll probably put it on our YouTube channel so your town council can watch the entire thing. So yeah, I can definitely provide that to you.
Tonya, this question's for you. Stacy had stated inconsistency caused confusion, but variation on window tint, stating 45%, even though it's not good enough, but then pushing local governments to do 15% transmittance. It seems a little crazy, but could this use a little bit of political pushback, or did this receive a little bit of political pushback, and why?
Sure. So the tinting is one area where we hope to continue coordinating and perhaps, maybe get another update at some point in the future. But again, because this model ordinance is under DEP's rulemaking authority, one of the things that they had to be cognizant of when they were passing this update was consistency with their other rules. And so unfortunately, I can't really speak on DEP's behalf to really go into the details of why ultimately that decision was made. We certainly still maintain our recommendation of 15% tint because we feel that it provides the best protection for turtles. And again, it's something that we're going to continue to coordinate with DEP on and hopefully get some better guidance and perhaps some future updates on that. But again, they had to be cognizant of making sure that they were consistent with their other published rules.
And I just want to add that the good thing about this model is that it, like I mentioned, it does not have to be adopted in its entirety. So if a local government wants to move forward with making 15% tint the standard, they absolutely can. And that would be the best recommendation.
And then Robin Trindell also put in the chat as a reminder, the rule language has been 45% or less, not just 45%. The next question is also going to be for you, Tonya. Of all the turtle nests in Florida, do you have a breakdown as to how many are in the Florida Keys and what beaches are nesting beaches in the Keys?
That is an excellent question. I do not have that information directly in front of me, but I could get it.
Okay, and kind of a follow-up on the previous question, where exactly can someone find a copy of the model lighting ordinance? Stacy, if you want to answer that.
So I know on DEP's website, they have the entire chapter 62B 55 there, but if you just Google Florida Model Lighting Ordinance, it will come up. But yeah, I would say on DEP's website or just by Googling Florida Model Lighting Ordinance for sea turtle protection.
And Rachel,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say a quick sort of follow up to the question about nesting beaches. The FWC nesting program actually has an online interactive atlas of nesting beaches and nesting density. So I can post that in the chat and folks can take a look at that for nesting information.
Great. And it looks like somebody actually put the link in the chat if you're looking to on how to find the ordinance. And then Robin Trindell also provided some information about that. The next question we'll ask you, Tonya, are there any penalties for not adopting the new ordinance?
There are not. Remember, the model ordinance is just a model. It's meant to be guidance for local governments, but it's not a requirement that it has to be adopted. So we certainly encourage local governments to, consider updating based on that revised model, but there's not going to be any sort of, penalty for not doing it.
Stacy, what is the stance on interior lighting regulations and enforcement?
In terms of the 2020 model?
I'm going with yes.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely should have included that in here, so I apologize, but there are recommendations about managing interior lighting. Usually it has to do with behavior changes. So tinting is one of the ways that interior lighting is managed. So that's how they've recommended the 45% or less, but recommending that you go lower than that also. But with tinting, there's also recommendations about using window coverings such as curtains and positioning lights so that they're not facing directly in front of a window. So that's usually the recommendations when it comes to managing interior lighting in ordinances.
Stacy, I'm going to start you off with this question, and Tonya, if you want to follow up. We purchased a spectrometer in case we are challenged during our lighting enforcement. Is there any way we can use this when we're on the beach at night conducting our lighting enforcement? Currently, we use the light filter.
That's a really good question. And with enforcement, there are always attempts to try to, quantify violations when it comes to either using, light meters or spectrometers. I would say in this instance, a spectrometer would be useful if you are not sure if the light is actually long wavelength or not. You would be able to point that at the light and see the wavelength reading, but you do have to be able to have access to the property to do that. So that's definitely a consideration, as you would have to point it directly at the light source. But that could be used as a tool to determine if a light is long wavelength or not.
Tonya, this question's for you. Can you confirm that all local governments that have beaches will have the new guidances?
Well, I'm not 100% certain if you're asking if they'll have access to the document, which yes, absolutely. It's a public document. It's in, state rules. So every local government can access that document, but again, they're not required to adopt it. So whether or not a local government decides they want to adopt provisions of the new model is up to the local government. So if you feel like it would be useful in your particular municipality, then I would certainly encourage you to, make that recommendation to the local governments.
Tony, I'm also going to ask you this question. Please discuss the new position of the beach lighting inspector.
Model, we have recommended creating a position of a beach lighting inspector. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a new staff person. It could be a code enforcement officer that's already doing lighting inspections. It might be someone that's already on staff. But one of the things that we have found in working with local governments is that those municipalities or counties that have staff that are specifically designated for handling lighting issues tend to have much better compliance because they have the same people focusing on this issue. They have the same people reaching out to all of these, not municipalities, but to the properties and the homeowners. So those homeowners and businesses get to know who the lighting person is. If they have problems, they know exactly who to contact. In areas where the task of handling lighting enforcement is sort of split amongst everyone. If you have, let's say, a large municipality and there's 20 code enforcement officers and whoever happens to be on shift is dealing with lighting issues, sometimes it can be more difficult to track those lighting violations from, the violation is noticed while they're on shift and then a notice is issued to the property and then they may or may not have to go through some sort of a code enforcement hearing or something like that. So when that task is sort of divvied amongst lots of different staff, it sometimes becomes difficult to see that all the way through to the end. And so that's why we've recommended having someone designated as working solely on lighting enforcement. So again, it may not necessarily be a brand new position or a new staff person. It might be someone that's already on staff that just is dedicated to that specific issue during nesting season.
Thank you. I'm also going to ask you another question, Tonya. Are there any specific recommendations regarding headlights on code enforcement vehicles that conduct lighting compliance inspections at night along the beach during sea turtle nesting season?
Sure. So I would first say that we don't recommend driving on the beach at night. If you can do your lighting inspections on foot, that's preferable. Not only because of the lights, but obviously you don't want to run the risk of running over turtles, running over nests, etc. If you do have to use a vehicle, then we recommend not using your headlights. If it's possible to drive without them, then you definitely want to drive without them. Again, because if you're out there to, look for problematic lighting on the beach, you don't want to be the problematic lighting on the beach. However, if it's absolutely necessary and there are no other ways for you to be out there except in a vehicle, then there are filters that you can buy to put over the headlights so that they are red. But we absolutely do not, under any circumstances, recommend using white headlights in a vehicle on the beach at night. So I'm happy to, provide some other recommendations offline. You can contact me directly, and I can provide some better recommendations on that specific to your situation.
Thank you. Stacy, I'm going to start you out with the next question, and then Tonya, if you have anything to add. Stacy, our town had been handing out red cover filters. They said turtle friendly for cell phones, but we're told from STC that they weren't actually filtering the light. Is there any product for cell phones?
Yes, thank you, Allison. This is a really great point to bring up. I had mentioned that the use of flashlights and cell phone lights is a growing issue on our beaches, and Allison in South Carolina has noticed this. Unfortunately, there is no turtle-friendly alternative when it comes to temporary lighting. These filters that are marketed as turtle-friendly do not actually change the wavelength of the light that's being emitted. The intensity of those lights and the location on the beach in which they're being used are unfortunately just not turtle friendly. So STC's position is to just not use any temporary lights when you're on the beach in nesting season at all. That's the most turtle friendly solution. We as humans do have night vision, so we're able to be on the beach at night without any lights and be able to see. And it really is the best solution to making sure that sea turtles are not disoriented by our temporary lights.
Tonya, did you have any follow-up?
Not really. We agree that the filters for cell phones are not really effective. The only thing I would add is that, you know, if you feel like you have to have something for safety, let's say, you know, when you're going up the stairs to get over a beach access or something like that, not for general use when you're on the beach, but again, let's say you need to get over some stairs to get on or off the beach. Instead of using a cell phone with a filter, we would recommend having a little red LED flashlight, because that way you know that the light is actually long wavelength as opposed to just putting a color over full spectrum lights. Again, we don't recommend even those lights, red headlamps or red flashlights. We don't recommend that people just generally use them while you're walking around on the beach. But that's something you can carry in your pocket. And, you know, if you get to a spot where you really need to see right in front of you, you know, to get on or off the beach or something like that, that's what we would recommend instead.
And I think that answered the next question, which was what about headlamps on headlamps that have the red bulb option?
I do want to give a plug since we're on the topic. I hosted a presentation just about flashlights that's available on our YouTube channel if you want to learn more about why even the red LED flashlights are not the best option for walking on the beach. So our YouTube channel is just youtube.com/Sea Turtle channel, and you'll find it there.
We have a follow-up regarding headlight filter. Do you recommend amber or red?
So the
I think
headlights
that was actually for Tonya in regards to the car headlights. Sorry, Stacey.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha. So we generally recommend red. You know, if it has to be on headlights, which are quite bright, then red is the better option. And again, I just want to be clear that there are only, you know, there are very specific filters that you would need to use for something like that. There are lots of sort of colored filter papers that are out there available. But most of the time, those don't actually filter specific wavelengths. So there are some very specific companies that make these types of filters that do actually filter the wavelengths of light. So you need to be careful about which ones you're using.
Tonya, the next question's for you. Often with coastal violations, it is helpful when state and local enforcement officials work in parallel to solve the same violation. Does the state have ability to actively enforce lighting violations against an individual property owner to help back up local efforts?
That is a good question, and it's one that we get a lot. Again, because the Model Lighting Ordinance is just a model, it is not an enforceable law. So that means that we can't send an FWC officer out to a property to give someone a notice of violation for violating that ordinance, because it's not a true law, it's guidance for local governments. So we are absolutely here to help support in terms of providing recommendations, technical assistance, our expertise, but we can't necessarily, send someone a violation for violating the model ordinance.
And just a plug, it looks like Tonya had put in a link to the nesting atlas earlier, and Robin Trindell is also providing some information about that as well. If you missed it, you can find that information in the chat. The next question, our code enforcement was able to retrofit the ATVs with a directional spotlight that is lamped with a long wavelength bulb and do not use headlights. Brilliance LED has a certified lamp that is used in the spotlight. Any thoughts on the use of the downward directional spotlight, Tonya?
It sounds like that option is certainly better than having headlights. Obviously, with a spotlight, you can sort of direct it where you need it to be. And particularly if it has a certified long wavelength bulb in it, that's way better than having headlights. Again, we would only recommend using it if you absolutely have to and you can't see. But I think that sounds like a good idea. I mean, it's, without seeing it, it's hard to know, but it sounds like that would be preferable and probably not as bright as using headlights.
That is all the questions that are currently in the chat. So we'll give anybody an additional minute if you're typing something out.
These are all great questions.
Oh, a few more came through. Has there been any updates to using astronomical clocks?
That's a good question. So we still do not recommend the use of, astronomical clocks or timers or things like that, because we feel that the lighting can be designed in such a way that it is safe for humans and also safe for turtles to be used year round. But also having lights that, change color between nesting season and non-nesting season perpetuates this idea that turtle lighting is not safe, which is not true if it's designed correctly. So we still recommend installing lighting that can be used year round without having to make any changes. With that said, again, it's up to local governments whether that's something that they would want to include in their own lighting ordinances.
The next question, does the state have any law or regulation they can actively enforce on lighting violations by individual owners?
That's a tough question. Getting into nitty-gritty specific circumstances, I suppose it's possible. We really only have jurisdiction, for the most part, with specific properties when it comes to our involvement in state permitting processes like the Coastal Construction Control Line. But if it's just sort of an individual property that's having a bunch of problems, it's possible that there could be ramifications under the Marine Turtle Protection Act. Usually that's reserved for, pretty egregious violations. Again, like I said, because the model ordinance isn't really an enforceable law, we can't just, we can't send law enforcement officers out just to handle, sort of normal lighting violations. So if there was something really bad, then, there might be an opportunity for law enforcement to get involved, under the Florida Marine Turtle Protection Act. But those types of cases are generally beyond my pay grade, so I'm not often involved in those.
If it makes you feel better, Tony, Robin did put in the chat Marine Turtle Protection Act. So there was a question in the chat earlier about if we could provide the link to the YouTube channel. So Stacy provided the general link, and then Emily Asp also provided the link to the actual video. There's also a question if you could put your emails into the chat. I see Stacy already did that. Tonya, if you could type your email into the chat. And then the next question, we'll start with you, Stacy. Is the recommendation for lighting on the east side of the structure still downward directed and shielded, but can be white light?
So I did read that question. I don't know the exact section where it mentions it, but I know light that is not directly visible is mentioned in the new model. I just don't know exactly where. So I don't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I don't know if you do, Tonya.
I'm sorry, I was typing my email. Rachel, could you repeat the question?
Absolutely. Is the recommendation for lighting on the east side of the structure still downward directed and shielded, but can be white light? And I'm assuming this is referring to the road side of the building and not the beach side of the building, depending on which coast you're on.
Sure. So there is in the new model, there is a provision for lighting that is not for safety and security purposes, essentially non-egress lighting, which Stacy did mention during the presentation that there is an allowance for that. In the revised model, we still recommend that should be long wavelength lights. So we're trying to allow a little bit of flexibility there for properties that want to have something a little bit decorative, a little bit pretty, sort of, you know, increase the aesthetic appeal of the building to have something a little bit decorative, as long as it's not visible from the beach. However, we are still recommending that is long wavelength because we want to make sure that the sort of overall ambient light coming from the property is all long wavelength.
That was the last question. So we'll give it another minute and see if anyone else puts something in there. It looks like that was the last question. People are just saying thank you. So Stacy, if you'd like to close this out.
And I just want to say again, thank you all so much for attending and spending your time learning about this new model. I think it is so exciting that it's finally passed, and we hope that you use this information to hopefully update your local ordinances to better protect sea turtles. And I just want to say thank you to Tonya and to Rachel for assisting with this presentation. And again, this will be recorded. So for anyone who was not able to attend, we will have this recording on our YouTube channel. So thank you.